In late 1961, a shiny new microcomputer, the PDP-1, made by DEC, was installed on the second floor of Building 26, the location of the MIT Electrical Engineering Department. As with all technology, the students learning from it were working on new ways to get the most out of it. 3 students decided to work on one project that would meet some simple criteria. They wanted to make a program that functioned equally well as an entertainment experience for players and as a demonstration for spectators while using as much of the computer's resources as possible. This project would become one of the most influential video games of all time, SpaceWar, created for this PDP-1 in 1962. Later on in 2007, SpaceWar would be named to a list of the 10 most important video games of all time, the basis of which formed the start of the game canon at the Library of Congress. Today we're going to be taking a look back at SpaceWar, the PDP-1, the game canon, the Library of Congress, gamepads, hacking culture. This was an influential moment in history, and we're going to talk about all of it. So stick around for an early video game history lesson as we take another trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Welcome one, welcome all to the 31st episode of our Video Game Nostalgia Podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week we take a look back at one game that was released somewhere during the current week in gaming history, kind of, sort of, and we talk about it. In doing so, we hope to teach you something new about the game, what it gave to the world, what it took from the world, or something new about the world around it. My name is David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co host, who fancies himself a hacker because he figured out the Wi Fi password to the pizza shop down the street. My brother, Rob Casson. Rob, how's the local pizza scene these days?
Well, Dave, cheesy as always, much like my jokes.
No one would believe us if I told him we don't write this ahead of time because stuff like that just feels like we do.
Well, hey, it's true what I said. My jokes are cheesy, as is the pizza.
Oh,
And, just like Chester said, it ain't easy being cheesy.
that is indeed. Is that dude even still around anymore?
I, mm, uh,
I don't know. Chester, if you're out there, hit us
yes.
up.
I see him on my bag right now, the hot flaming hot Cheetos.
That's not what I meant, but okay. I don't think we've actually really gotten a chance to hang out or talk since we last recorded, have we?
No, that's correct.
That is correct. How you been?
I've been well, just plugging and chugging away. How about yourself?
Good, good. What you playing this? What have you played this week?
Mostly RuneScape, little bit of very small amount of Tarkov, and also a small amount of Apex.
Apex, huh?
Yeah, got some friends from college who I started playing with the other night, and had some fun. So
Is that why I got a random Apex invite the other day? Was it you and your friends playing?
no, that was not from me.
Hmm. I did. I got a random Apex invite from someone I don't play with regularly, so I don't really know who they are.
I don't know.
Awesome, Apex. How is Apex these days? Is it better?
I, I guess I don't really. I never really played it in the beginning, so
Is it good? Are you enjoying it?
it's fun with friends. I can't play solo. That's really infuriating to me, and I don't like playing with randoms because it's just who I am this week.
Yeah.
Lying in the grass next to the mausoleum. Anywho, so yeah, I don't really get to play without friends, so I don't get to play a whole lot because the people I normally play with aren't always on. So, I mean, when I get to play with them, it's fun, but we just kind of goof off and don't really care how we do. If we lose, we lose. It's just a game.
Huh, absolutely.
Ain't like Rocket League. It ain't life.
No, it ain't life at all. No, 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 no. That's for sure. Well, Rob, today we're going to talk early video game history. and I mean early video game history. It's going to be a lot of talk about probably technology and games and a bit of culture that I'm gonna go on a limb here and say that a large majority of our listening audience probably won't have a basis of. Truth be told, if I never took the time to study video game history, I wouldn't have heard of probably any of the stuff we're gonna talk about today, which is cool because it's kind of it's neat to be able to fill in. I mean, literally, what's a it's a black hole of knowledge for a lot of people. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, Dave. Knowledge.
Yeah, I know. Some people like it, some people don't, but we definitely try to teach people something around here. So, and I'm guessing if you've stuck around this long, you like learning stuff because that's what we're about. We're all about learning things. Rob, when you took your electrical engineering, did they did you ever have to visit the early history of computing and any of those? Did they make you take like a computer science deal or anything like that?
I mean, I had to learn basics of programming with Java, but it didn't like teach us the history of computers. I mean, we did definitely talk about like Murphy's Law and things of that nature and like the development of the processing units, chips, transistors getting smaller and smaller, allowing more complex things we put on a small space, but having to worry about heat dissipation. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's covered, but I guess depends more on what precisely you're looking for.
I mean, there were computers before there were transistors, you know? That's just the honest truth of it. There were computers before that. That the transistor was or is it capacitor? No, it's transistor. One of those was the invention that allowed us to have microcomputers, but there were computers before we had.
Transistors.
Yeah, there were computers before we had microcomputers.
Right.
um Giant, like, warehouse, you know there was one computer in the mix that was what, 3,000 square feet, which is like twice the size of my house. Is this one computer took up the space the space. Yeah, a lot of the early stuff was super 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 cool. um so the game I want to look at today, I'm going to start it's a title called Space War, and we're going to get into it. I am going to start from the beginning. But the one thing I want to talk about first is the game canon. So, Rob, do you know what the function of the Library of Congress is?
One more time.
The function of the Library of Congress.
Is that to document the history of the United States?
It's not just the United States, but that's essentially the notion of it. It's a research library that officially serves the United States Congress, and it's the by notion de facto National Library of the United States. It's actually the oldest federal cultural institution in the US, and it's one of the largest libraries in the world. Its notion is to document and collect as many cultural and I guess information, because a lot of library is information, right? Cultural and informational and information as possible is it. Why that's important is because there is more to the Library of Congress than just books. There's a film portion to the Library of Congress, and back in 2007, I'm not mistaken, they started a game canon, which is basically where they started to collect copies and keep copies of digital games that have a cultural significance and a historical significance. So somewhere in our Library of Congress are actually video games.
Hmm.
Why I want to bring this up is because the game canon started, like I said, back in I believe it's 2007, and there were 10 video games on it in the initial game canon. And these are 10 games that are each considered to represent the beginning of a genre that is still viable in the video game industry. So they took 10 games and said, "Okay, these are the cultural basis for what's still out there." And I want to talk for a moment about those 10 games because SpaceWar is one of those games. Just I know there's a million and one games, but we've talked about some of these. So if the basis was that these are 10 games that are considered to represent the beginning of a vital genre, what are some other games that you can guess are on the game canon? You have 9 others. You won't get them
E.T.
all. Not E.T. Yeah. E.T. What genre is that? The landfill genre?
Exactly.
Oh my god. Oh, what are some other games we talked about that we've said, these games define a genre?
Well, I would have to say Doom.
You nailed one right on the head. Good job.
Um, let's see. Pac-Man.
No, not Pac-Man.
Oh,
I'll tell you that we've only there are 2 more games on the list that we have talked about, one of which we did a specific episode on. I don't believe any of the others have ever come up, so I won't hold you to it. So
so we're looking at genres here.
we're looking at genres, a game that's considered to
Hmm.
represent the beginning of a genre. And I don't agree with beginning of a genre because in these cases they may not have been the beginning, but they were the games that cemented them. They were the games that cemented them in. So
Oh, well, let's see. There's 4X, so probably Civ.
you nailed your 2 for 2, bro.
Well, actually, I'm 2 for 4,
That's true.
but halfway there or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Let's
Really
see.
only
This is
really
tough.
only yeah, only one more game on here we've had a chance to talk about, and we talked about it because we did an episode on this person made a very big game that you enjoy very much that we talked about recently, that a lot of people don't think is a game, if that gives you a hint.
The Sims.
Yes, but it's not The Sims. What else did, Wright make?
Uh, um,
Where'd The Sims come from?
was it Sim City?
It is, yeah, SimCity's the other
Ah,
one.
awesome.
I'll give you another hint. Probably the most simple game, the most popular game, the game that's been ported to more systems than anything else, and it's a puzzle game of sorts. What puzzle game do you think has been ported to more platforms than any game in history?
Professor Layton.
Good answer, but no. I wish Professor Layton would come to more platforms.
Hmm. Puzzle. I mean, what kind of puzzle? Like a puzzle or like
I mean,
is it
it's a puzzle genre. It's a puzzle type game where you put pieces together.
shapes made of blocks?
It is shapes made of blocks, yes.
Ah, Tetris.
Mhm. Alright, so we got SpaceWar, we got Tetris, we got SimCity, we got Civ, and we got Doom. I will fill in some blanks for you. Star Raiders, which we've never talked about. Zork, which we've never really talked about. Zork was the very first. I love Zork. Zork was a text game, one of the early popular text games. Super Mario Bros. 3 is part of the canon.
Three. Why three? I
That's a great question. I was wondering that too, and I don't know the answer to that. I think 3 was for reasons a very it was very much a genre defining, platforming and level choosing and power-ups, and there are a lot of elements in that genre that kind of started with Super Mario Bros. 3, but you could easily trace it back to Super Mario Brothers and then even trace that back even further, you know what I mean?
Yeah, fair enough.
The Warcraft series. They
Oh, should have got that one.
And on the sports side, it was the sensible world of soccer, which I don't
The what?
is that sensible world of soccer?
I'm not familiar with that one. FIFA must have really swept it under the rug.
I think it was well, I don't think, I'll tell you, it's a precursor to that. So it's an early sports game.
Are we sure it's not the Sensible World of Soccer 4?
Why 4?
I mean, Super Mario Brothers 3. I mean, maybe the fourth one introduced a new mechanic of like actually being
I
able to
don't
play
know.
well or something. I don't know.
Yeah, so video games by their original definition, their purely technical definition, would be pretty much disqualified nowadays. Luckily, we've kind of gotten past that. And video games nowadays are pretty much any game played on hardware that has electronic logic circuits that we can interact with that outputs what we do to a screen. Pretty generic nowadays. But I'll tell you that even before we had what we would consider video games, we had interactive electronic games. And the earliest interactive electronic game that we can find only really existed in patent form and maybe a prototype. It was way back in 1947, way back in 1947. Um, and this was called a cathode ray tube amusement device. And so basically, what it was is it was just a ray tube. Uh, and this was all analog. That's what amazes me, Rob, is that this was analog, right? So basically, you had a CRT screen in front of you, and it had a spot that was on and it was an oscilloscope screen. So think like radar screen in movies, doop, doop, doop. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep, sure do.
It had a beam spot on it, and you would have to overlay the screen with like a plastic graphic. And basically there was a spot like an airplane on the graphic, and you would use knobs on it to kind of maneuver your beam to where the spot was, like the airplane was. And when you got to where the airplane was, the beam would basically defocus, which made it go blurry and spread out wider, which was like the indication of an explosion on the airplane, right?
Right.
There wasn't anything that really recorded score or did anything like that. It was just it was these. You had these you hit a spot, you defocused, and that was it. They were trying to make something that could be used on TVs, but they never really got anywhere with that. So it was 1947. It was really, really early. It was never manufactured. It was never marketed to the public, and so it really gets discontinued because it's not considered a video game because it didn't run on a computing device, right? It was purely analog, and it also had no effect on the future video game industry. I just think it's fascinating that we had someone was trying to make an electronic game device of some kind as early as 1947. That just fascinates me. You know,
It is really surprising.
it's really early. Um, just like when we talked about VR, you know, the early history of computing and games was really developed in universities and labs and for military purposes and stuff like that. We see a lot of the same stuff. The earliest known publicly demonstrated electronic game came 3 years earlier in 1950. Okay. So in 1950, a computer was created called Birdie to Brain. And that name cracks me up every time I see Birdie to Brain. It's considered an early computer game. It's one of the earliest in the history of video games. It was a 13-foot tall computer that allowed exhibition attendees, because it was created for the 1950 Canadian National Exhibition. So it's a 13-foot tall computer that allowed attendees to play a game of tic tac toe against an artificial intelligence, right? Basically, the player would sit in front of a like keypad that looked like a 3 by 3 grid, and they would hit the button and it'd put a zero there, and then the computer would do an X and vice versa. Um, and they would go back and forth. This was the first computer game to have any sort of visual display, and so really this is one of the earliest video games that we know of, and it was certainly the first to be showcased to people anywhere, period. The Canadian National Exhibition lasted for, I don't know, 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, the machine was disassembled, and that's it. That was it. We have some pictures of it, but we really don't have any. We really don't have anything else of it. But it's funny because Birdie the Brain, Rob, the first computer game to feature a visual display of any sports or sorts. Sports? Why did I say sports?
'Cause you're still thinking about Splendid Soccer 4 or whatever the hell it was.
Yeah, I know. Splendid soccer. Nearly a year later, we got the Nimrod computer. The Nimrod computer was an early computer that was custom built to play Nim. Do you know what the game Nim is at all?
Does it have something to do with a rod?
Oh, well, I mean, the computer's the Nimrod, and we use the name Nimrod now. The game Nim is basically it's a mathematical game of strategy where two players take turns removing objects from distinct heaps or piles. Each turn a player has to remove one object, and they have to remove at least one object, but they may remove any number of objects provided they come from the same heap or pile. Essentially, what you're doing is you're trying to be the person who avoids taking the last object or the last object, or to take the last object. You can play it either way. It's weird. Anyway, Nim's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the Nimrod and not my co-host. We're actually talking about the computer. Do you like how I stuck that in there?
Aha, aha.
Hey, that's probably what the first computer sounded like too, just so you know. That's pretty good. Good job. Nimrod played Nim, but it used light bulbs instead of a screen with real-time visual graphics, and so some people don't really consider it one of the early video games, but it is a game that was played on a computer back in 1951, which is kind of cool. And I like talking about big computers. So this computer was 12 feet by 9 feet by 5 feet. This huge computer, again, built for an exhibition so people could play Nim against computers, because that was the thing. No one really this was early computers. People were still trying to figure out like uses for it, and games were still a super early thing that they were thinking of, right?
Right,
Right. Right.
right.
Right. Right. It was about the same time that there were non-visual games being developed at various research computer labs. Christopher Strachey, about this time, developed a game of checkers for the Pilot Ace computer at the British National Physical Laboratory. What's unique about this is that the Pilot Ace was a general purpose computer. And so this game and they called it Droughts, not checkers. This game was the first known computer game to be created for a general purpose computer, whereas everything we talked about prior to this was a machine made specifically for the game, like Birdie the Brain, for instance. About the same year, the first game of chess was written for a Ferranti Mark I computer, which is one of the earliest commercially available computers. What's unique about the first game of chess was it wasn't even powerful enough to play a full game in chess. It could only do what they call mate and two problems, which are very limited games of chess. So there wasn't a whole lot that we could do with early computers and games, but we were cruising along. We were cruising along here. It really wouldn't be until 1958 that we got the next significant jump in video game history, and in 1958 we got what's called Tennis for Two. I mean, I guess it goes without saying. What kind of game do you think we have here, Rob?
I'm gonna guess it's a first person shooter, Dave.
Yeah, yeah, definitely a first person shooter. For how many players, man?
I'm gonna say about 32.
Yep, 32. Very good. Yeah, it's really amazing how little far we've come since 1958 then. You know what I mean?
Yeah, not very far at all. We're only up to, like, 33 or something.
Oh, so in 1958, a designer called William Higginbotham made a game called Tennis for Two. And basically, the Brookhaven National Lab would have, again, another exhibition. And all they really had at the time was exhibits that would show peaceful uses of atomic power, because that's what Brookhaven was working on, you know? And so Higginbotham wanted to create something that would give exhibitionists something else to do. And so his idea was to use the analog computers and the oscilloscopes and such to create an exhibit that people could play. And so he basically built Tennis for Two. When I say oscilloscope, can you visualize what a oscilloscope is? You use them all the time, don't you?
Yeah,
Even still.
I I used them extensively in college during my degree earning.
That's right, you did. What do you use oscilloscopes for in your stuff?
We use them to, you know, check frequencies.
Can you imagine playing a video game on one?
It was like a video game trying to get it set up. I'm telling you, man, those things are.
Well, so Tennis for Two basically had a flat, like the way it was created. There's a flat line across the middle of the screen, which was your ground, and then a little line in the middle that was your net, and then you basically just bounced a ball back and forth. He had two aluminum controllers that were set up here, and people lined up for day. People, it was a 3-day exhibition, and thousands of people lined up to play this. What's unique about Tennis for Two is that it's literally the first computer game we know of that was created purely as an entertainment product and not for academic research or for promoting the technology that it went into it. Um, and I think that's kind of cool. The very first entertaining video game was tennis. In the beginning, it was really simple. Later, they would upgrade the game to simulate different levels of gravity, so you could play tennis with the gravity of the moon or the gravity of Jupiter. So there were a lot of fun stuff that you could do, and it lasted for a couple years. But after 1959, the lab decided they wanted to use its components for other things, so they disassembled it. A lot of the early stuff they disassembled. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And depending on your actual definition of video games, this could literally be the first game. I don't know. There's a lot of confusion over that kind of stuff. Which was the first game? There were various computer games that were being run alongside this. There was we started to get smaller computers more alongside of microcomputers not too long afterwards in the early 60s. Actually, we started to get transistor based computers. That's what I want to talk about. We started to get transistor based computers, and so we started to get mini computers, and and so all these universities that were getting these computers would make games. You see tic tac toe pop up. There was a mouse and a maze game pop up. In 1958, there were various business management simulation games. It's said that in 1961 there were over 89 different business simulation games in use, each which had different various graphical capabilities. Despite us knowing that in 1961 we had 89 different business games, at this point there was no inkling, no even notion of a commercial video game industry. At this point, almost all games had been developed on a single machine for specific purposes, and the simulation games that created were not really designed to be commercial or for entertainment. It would be a few years later that we would get SpaceWar. In late 1961, they installed a PDP-1 mini computer on the second floor of Building 26, which was the MIT Electrical Engineering Department. And this early computer, had a punch tape reader. Basically, the games were programmed on punch cards, which I think is really cool. And it had inputs from panel switches, and it had a CRT display that it could input. And students were finding all sorts of fun ways to do it. Well, three students decided that they wanted to make some kind of two-dimensional maneuvering sort of thing, and so they decided that the obvious thing to do with it would be spaceships, and so they created SpaceWar. So basically, in SpaceWar, you have two spaceships. One's called the Needle, one's called the Wedge, and they're put on opposite corners with a star like rotating in the middle, and they have to maneuver around the star on basically a 2D plane in the gravity well of the star. It's like a star field, and they fire torpedoes at one another. That's it. It's a really simple game. It's 1962, people. It's not going to be complex. But you can kind of think of it, the probably the game that most of us are going to know that bears the most influence is Asteroids. Rob, have you spent much time playing Asteroids?
I haven't spent much time playing it, although I am quite familiar with the game.
Do you know why you're familiar with the game?
Um, because Dad played it a lot.
There you go. Yeah, that was our dad's favorite game.
Yeah, no, Galaga too, you know?
Yeah, I
Asked
know.
mom all about the trip to the Smokies.
Oh, they had them in your guys' cabin?
He drove mom insane.
Yeah, I remember growing up that our dad's favorite game was Asteroids, and realistically, SpaceWar is incredibly similar to Asteroids, except there's no asteroids coming out of, floating through there. It's two spaceships circling a star in the middle trying to shoot each other. Um, initially, all they would use to control the game were like front panel switches on the computer, and there was like four switches for each player, but they were right next to each other, and the location of the switches kind of left one player off to one side, one player off the other, and it was really awkward. And so to alleviate these problems, one of the programmers of the game created this detached control device, which was basically a gamepad. It had a switch for turning left and right. It had another switch that was forward thrust, or what they had called hyperspace, and there was a button for launching torpedoes. And it's funny too because he said that they designed the gamepad so the button was silent because they didn't want the other player to have a warning that there was a torpedo being fired. So,
Nice.
but it's really interesting because we're back here, 1961, 62, literally one of the first video games, depending on your definition of it. Because this is one of the earliest one that literally fits the definition, and we already had a gamepad, and I think that's really funny because we don't think of early gaming as gamepads in any like I don't. When you think of early video gaming, do you think of gamepads at all?
I do not know.
No, what were all the early video game systems? What did they use to control things?
Joystick.
Joystick. Yeah. By the time video games became mainstream, they were using joysticks. But this very first one, this early one, so long ago, actually had a gamepad, and for whatever reason, that cracks me up. Yeah, so I mean, we had Space War, this little computer game for two players on a PDP one, and that was it. They wanted to create a game that would show off like all these features of one of the first microcomputers, and so they made a space game that's super important. Do you know why it's super important?
Mm, not entirely sure, Dave. Why is that?
1971, 9 years later, we got Galaxy Game. Galaxy Game is the first coin operated video game. Basically, Galaxy Game is just an expanded version of Space War. It's got two spaceships, the Needle and the Wedge. They're engaged in a dogfight while maneuvering the gravity well of a star, and both are controlled by human players. And so this is the first coin operated arcade that we know of, which is basically just Space War put into a coin operated system. Our earliest video games, the ones that started this whole revolution, came from Space War. I don't know any other way to put it. I can't talk it up anymore. I wanna put it there. So
Space War.
Space War. And it's funny because by the time this came out, the first prototype of Galaxy game was built on a PDP-11. We started out making the game on a PDP-1, and their prototype was housed in a PDP-11. By the time they installed their first prototype, they had spent about $65,000, just to put this into perspective, which in more modern money is over $400,000. Think
Wow.
about that. The first prototype coin op game cost these two kids, I don't know if they were kids, cost these two guys over $400,000.
Wow. That's a lot.
The first one is still around. It was restored and so it was around, and I don't know about the first prototype. It might be the second prototype, but it stayed at Stanford because where it was made for a long time. It died in the 70s, and then it was restored in the 90s, and then it got moved to the Computer History Museum in the year 2000. So that first one is still around somewhere, but it had competition. Computer Space. It had a competitor in Computer Space. And so Computer Space was another derivative of SpaceWar. It's Computer Space has the basically honor of being the first arcade video game in the traditional sense. And also, it was the first commercially available video game. There was another pair of guys, and this was Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney, and Bushnell would go on to create Atari, so Bushnell is super important. And they were looking to do the same thing the other guys who created Galaxy Space did, right? They wanted to make a basically arcade version of Space War, but they were running into the problem where they couldn't find an economical way to build this machine around a mini computer. I mean, let's be honest, the other guys spent $400,000 to make their prototype machine, right?
Right.
These guys wanted to make a more viable one. And so basically, their idea was that instead of using a mini computer to run this, they thought of replacing the central computer with custom designed hardware created just to run the game. And so basically, like the cost of theirs went from the $65,000 that the other guys were looking to, I think it's roughly about $1,000 a machine. And so suddenly we had a machine that could be built that was cost effective and could be mass produced. And so they did it. And so we have Computer Space, which is literally the first arcade game. Have you ever heard of Computer Space before?
I have not.
Yeah. So what's the first on the same note, what's the first arcade game like that you can think of? The earliest arcade title that you can think of?
Uh,
Think of early games. What do you think?
did
What do
no,
you
no,
what
no, hold on. I was gonna ask a damn question.
Ooh, okay.
Does I don't know if the original title. I don't actually know what the title was called, but the Mario King Kong or Donkey Kong.
Donkey
Wow.
Kong? No, Donkey
Did
Kong is
that no? Was that before or after Pac Man? Because those are the two.
after. It was after
So
Don
Pac Man. I guess, and Asteroids and Galaga, but
Yeah.
I don't know if any of them are earlier
No,
than the others.
no, they are. They are. You're missing one really, really early one, and I do think that when I tell you what it is, it's gonna be like a facepalm moment.
Pong.
There you go. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
Nope.
yeah.
I know it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
So
I when I think of Pong though, I don't really think arcade. I think Atari.
I know, I absolutely agree with that. When they made Computer Space, they made it under the title like Syzygy Engineering, and they basically the next year they they left this company or they reformed the company as Atari as they launched Pong in 1972, and that's kind of when they blew up was Pong and started to really get into it. I mean, let's think. This was the first arcade game, the first commercially available arcade game. It only sold about 1,500 units. It wasn't that popular, and obviously we don't still have games called Space War, Computer Space, but we still have Pong. And we still have, I mean, I guess asteroids, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we have asteroids. You can actually go and play. It's if you just Google Space War, there's a million and one emulators, like Java written programs that emulate the PDP-1. It's not that hard to emulate that have Space War on it. But yeah, that is that's kind of the early history of video games up until Space War and a little bit past. So Space War has a lot of significance, a lot of significance in video game history, which is why it's in the game canon because it's the game that literally there are the very first arcade machines were I don't know, copying, right?
Right.
Copying. I wanna go back though because the Space War was on the PDP-1, a really early microcomputer, and this PDP-1 is noted for another reason. So I kinda wanna talk about the intersection where of where, SpaceWar and everything came into it. The PDP-1 is very much known for being the computer that helped cement the and develop early hacker culture. So I want to take a few moments to talk about hacker culture because I don't think that that's something that people talk about. And I do think in a lot of ways it's very much intertwined with computers, which are intertwined with video games. I think as a cultural phenomenon, everything is all kind of tied together. It all started here with the PDP-1. And so I kind of want to, like I said, I want to look back at that intersection. Rob, what is hacker culture to you?
That that I, that's such a difficult question.
Nah, I know. What do you think a hacker is?
I mean, a hacker is someone who manipulates codes and like the weak link in the armor, but it looks for flaws in codes to gain access to systems and manipulate them in some way. This can be malicious in intent, or it could be for the sake of improving the systems. There are people who are paid to do that to help protect, but it's just people who find these exploitations and exploit them. Obviously, find exploitations in codes and get into the system and manipulate it based on.
So you ascribe to the notion that a hacker is someone that is more of a security breaker?
I mean, yeah, I suppose it's simple terms. That is, I don't necessarily think it's entirely security based because you can, I mean, hack anything. You can make modifications to anything, and it's not always a security thing. You could be hacking your kid's, little go kart to go faster.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So hacker culture itself makes a very strong distinction between hackers and what they call crackers. And what the public face of hacking in is typically what a cracker is, and that's the security breaker. Where there are like white hat hackers or good crackers who do exactly what you said. They use their computer skills and knowledge to learn about how networks and systems work. They discover and they fix security holes. And then there are evil crackers who are black hat hackers who use the same skills to author harmful software like viruses, or they illegally infiltrate systems with the intention of doing harm. Also, the ones who use their skills to illegally obtain digital information. Those are all um,
Evil crackers.
those are all evil crackers. It's kind of funny to say crackers, isn't it? Oh man, someone at work today showed me a redneck guy down here who does these funny cooking ish videos called the stale cracker, and so I had the stale cracker stuck in my head as we were talking about it. So
Nice.
but the hacker culture is basically a subculture of individuals who enjoy the intellectual challenge of creatively overcoming limitations of systems to achieve novel, aka better or clever outcomes. So you're not wrong when you're talking about hacking a go-kart to go faster. I would think that that's right in line with what the hacker culture wants to be known for. I that's it. Period. I would think that it's really known for. But this culture started way back in MIT in the 1960s, very much here on the PDP-1. And it was originally these guys who, loved programming and wanted to make programs as good as they could be and wanted to do something that was different or more exciting and trying to squeeze as much out of these computers as everything. And the hacker culture that started way back here at MIT in the 60s, they have some ethics, and I just kind of want to briefly touch on the ethics of the hacker culture, right? And so hacker attitudes, they believe that access to computers or anything that might teach you something about the way the world works should be unlimited and total. They feel that all information should be free. They feel that hackers should be judged by their hacking and not other criteria like degrees, age, race, position. Nothing else matters but your skill. Hackers believe that you can create art and beauty on a computer, and hackers believe that computers can change your life for the better. Hacker ethics are, all about sharing and openness and collaboration and just being hands-on with all that stuff. And I would argue that a lot of the internet itself, some of the things that we take for granted are really based out of this all these hacker ethics, this hacker culture, right?
Right.
Things like Wikipedia, all information should be free. We're all about sharing and openness and collaboration and engaging in hands-on like that like that's hackers in a nutshell. So it's really funny. I guess why I like to do these little history lessons, honestly. The first electronic device was 1947, right? That's 70 how many years? 74? 74 years. Am I right? My math, I'm not crazy. 74.
Sure.
So
I'll
think
let I'll let everyone else.
be a judge of how bad my math is.
Yep. That's my plan. Mwahaha.
Think how far we've come since then. I mean, we have computers in everything. We have computers that we talk to, you know? We have computers in wristwatches. We have a phone. The original computers took up warehouses and we communicate on a phone that's there were tubes. There were single tubes needed to run that computer that were 10 times more than that. That were much bigger than the phone that we run. Computers bring us TV because computers bring us information and computers bring us music. We have access to all this stuff at our fingertips. We've come that far in 60, 70 years, basically. You know? It's
Pretty
just
crazy when you think about it.
well, we are thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. Everyone else is just gonna roll their eyes. Oh, there goes Dave on a tangent again. But I just think it's awesome to think how far we've come. And also sometimes it's sad to think about how far we haven't come. So as part of my research, I found a television show from 1983 called The Computer Chronicles, and they were talking about mini computers. And one of the things they were doing is they were showcasing HP 103, or it was an early HP personal computer. It's one of the earlier PCs, and they were touting features on it like touchscreen. This was pre-mouse era, and so they basically used their finger on the screen because touchscreens have been around forever because they were used on terminal like computer terminals, commercially and so on and so forth. And so like they're talking up, the touch screen and float computing and parallel computing they're talking about. And these are still concepts that we're in the middle of. You know what I mean? Like touchscreen devices are still a thing for us, and parallel computing is something that we're still getting a grasp on because it's the basis for a lot of the way we're looking at computing with multiple cores and stuff like that. And it's just we jumped so fast for so long, and while we've come so far, we also haven't at the same time. I guess is the point I'm trying to make. Well, Rob, what else you got? Anything that you want me to touch base in there or that I forgot or can elaborate on or anything, talk while we talked a little bit about early video game stuff?
No, Dave, I think everyone's well on their way to bed by now.
Yeah, I know. I'd like to be too.
Oh my.
Oh. All right. Well, I think this is a good point to move on to our gaming question of the week. And I wanted to spend some time talking about your earliest video game memory. So, out of everything, what is your earliest memory of playing a video game? And I think we've touched on this before. So people that have been listening to us from the very beginning, because coincidentally, my earliest video game memory was a game that came out during our first episode. So I briefly touched on it. So we may have talked about some of this, but I'm going to talk about it again and expand on it.
Well, I am sure that my answer changes every time because I'm so indecisive on what my memory are. It just kind of come and go. But the two that I have that I'm not really sure which is first, they're just kind of concurrent in my brain, is I remember watching you and Jeremy play through Final Fantasy VII
Okay.
and, the train yard. And I remember trying it myself and having difficulty on the first Scorpion boss.
Yeah, the first Scorpion boss.
Yeah, that was pretty hard for me as a kid. And then the other one is playing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time with you, and many times we spent trying to just get through that.
We played. Yeah, we did. Turtles in Time on the Super Nintendo.
Oh yeah,
That was
a lot.
that was a sweet game. That was a really sweet game. I like those early beat 'em up Ninja Turtle games.
Absolutely, they were a lot of fun.
I have a lot of muddled video game memories all over the place. I still think the earliest one I talked about in the beginning was I remember when the first Nintendo was brought into our house, and I remember walking into our parents' bedroom because they hid it in their bedroom, and someone was playing baseball. I remember sneaking in when they weren't around to play baseball on the Nintendo Entertainment System. It didn't last in their room for very long. It got moved to a more family spot where we could play. So when we bought it, it was the one that had the light gun and it had the running pad. Have you ever seen the Nintendo running pad?
Yeah, I remember when we still had it here. It didn't work by the time I got to see it, but
Yeah.
I definitely remember trying to get it to work
Yeah, so
in
we
the
would
track
play.
and field.
Yep, so we would play duck hunt and we would play track and field running on that stupid pad. And then there were just so many other things that were brought in the house. There was a pong table brought in the house at one point. There were early computers. I had early Atari that I would play. God, all sorts of games on. I remember going over to one of our uncle's houses, and he had an Atari computer, and I would play games on his Atari computer. Not Atari, Mac. He had an early Macintosh computer that ended up at our house at one point.
The Apple II.
The Apple II. That's
I
correct.
remember that. I
I
many spent many times trying to get that thing working.
I know it was busto by the time it made it back to us. That's why it was given to us because it didn't work anymore.
Ah,
Uh, yeah, there were a lot of. I mean, we played. I played everything. I played Pong and Asteroids and Galaga and Centipede and all those early games would eventually make it in the house. Dad had it in television. The television cracks me up because it had a voice synthesizer module, and there was this one game called B-52 Bomber, and it would literally be like, "B-52 Bomber," and Dad thought it was the funniest freaking thing in the world, every time it would do that, and he would go around in his obnoxious voice going, "B-52 Bomber." I'm sure you can imagine him doing that.
oh, it's happened. It has happened.
Oh, man. Oh, yeah, we had that in television. We had those Nintendos, and then it would progress from there. Yeah, you came. I mean, obviously, we're more than a decade apart, so you would come later in the PlayStation era, huh?
Yeah, no, that's when I was, growing up. I remember playing PS1. I remember us having the original PlayStation, and then the PlayStation 2. Obviously, I remember playing the original Twisted Metals, one of my favorite game series. Like so much fun growing up, and I really wish that they would make them the way they used to. But
Yeah.
we've touched on that briefly in the past. But it's just definitely the earliest I can remember before all of that was, like I said, either Final Fantasy, and that's kind of where I felt like I started getting into gaming, or it was playing Turtles in Time.
And we had everything in between. I had the Game Boy. We have an episode coming up on Super Mario Land. I had that. I remember where I was when I beat Super Mario Land. Yeah, we didn't have everything, but we had stuff. Obviously, this probably wouldn't be a hobby for me if we didn't, you know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah.
We
You
rented
know,
a lot of stuff. My favorite thing was going to the video store after school on Fridays and getting to rent games and then sitting with, my best friends and doing nothing else than playing video games all weekend.
yeah, that lasted through my childhood as well. So thank you.
It did. Oh man, we used to stay up all weekend. I mean, and get like no sleep all weekend to play these video games. Oh, you wanted to eke as much time out of the rental games as you could. You wanted to eke as much time out of the rental games as you could. That was it.
Absolutely.
I remember Pitfall on the Ataris, Montezuma's Revenge, Mule, Hero. There was this weird flying game where you were on a jetpack called Hero. There's just so many. I mean, I played Zork. which was one of the early text-based games. I just played as much as I could. You would get these floppy disks that would just have games, like titles of games, and you'd be like, "Oh, let's see what this one is. Oh, let's see what this one is. Let's see what this one is," you know?
Mhm.
It was just a different time. It's weird. I think about it now and it's really weird how it was like the Wild Wild West. We were getting games on discs that were like handwritten copies too, you know what I mean?
Right. That's
Uh,
interesting.
and I have no clue where they were coming from. That's my part. I don't know where these copies were coming from or who was
Sometimes it
making
was better not to
copies.
ask.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or who was making copies or what we were doing. I remember playing Wolfenstein in the school computer lab. That was the first time I saw Wolfenstein. But even before that, I saw a one of the early Dungeons and Dragons, like dungeon crawling, like text based. It was graphical, but it was all like ASCII, you know? And so it was a dungeon crawler. I remember that one. Yeah, God, there's just so much in those early years. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy just to think about how far we've come.
That it is.
I'm thankful for it.
Absolutely. No doubt about that.
I'm incredibly thankful for it. We are very blessed to be living in an era which we're so technologically forward and we have what we have. I mean, we're at VR. They didn't even well, they did think of VR. We talked about that. Some guy thought about VR in a sci-fi novel in the 50s, but I mean like all these concepts were pipe dreams for people way back in these times we're talking about, and now they're legit things that are getting refined and then some, you know?
Absolutely.
That's cool. I think I've gabbed enough for today, really. I like early video game history. I do. I think it's so cool where we came from to where we are now with these just computers that fill up entire labs to gaming in the palm of our hands. Gaming on a watch. You could play games on the Apple Watch. How what the if we would have explained that to some person back in 1950 something when they were trying to find ways to use these big warehouse computers, they would have looked at us like we were crazy.
Probably, yeah.
They'd probably be very impressed too.
Maybe.
Yeah. So what do you think is next? Like, we've got all this technology and it's come this far. What do you think is next for us? What's the next jump? Where are we going with all this? You know what I mean?
Full body VR, like full immersion gaming, but
Mm.
I don't know how one would obviously there's great minds thinking of those things, but that's seems such sci-fi at this point.
Well, the real answer is because you're concerned with the physicality of full motion, right?
Well, more so full immersion, so the feel, the taste, the smell, the touch, everything is it's not just like the motion capture or anything. It's more of like all of your senses being contained within the game. You'd actually have to have like a neural link to the game in
Yeah,
some way
that's kind of
for
my
that.
thought too. We're jacking into the matrix,
I-
basically.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. Absolutely.
We are jacking into the matrix. I think that when we finally get to that point, that you're right, it's going to be a neural link, and there won't need to be any physicality because you jack yourself in it, and you basically get transported there neurologically to move, live, and exist in a world when you're not actually there. It won't be like right now where you actually have to wear a physical device and look and move and swing. You'll do it all with your mind. I do think I do think we'll get there. Jacking in the matrix, that's what I'm gonna call it.
All right.
But what if they use that against us? What if the machines use that against us like the Matrix? And we just become battery farms for them.
Well, it's a risk many of us are willing to make for good gaming.
All right, I'm good. Anything you want to add to the conversation?
No, I think that you touched on everything very well. Obviously, I don't know very much about this, so I can't speak too much to it.
What
So,
was
great job.
what was something that you learned today that you didn't know or were surprised by?
That's a very loaded question.
I mean, just one thing that you were like, "Hmm, I had no idea."
I mean, honestly, I had no idea that the Library of Congress kept video games.
There you go. That's a
That
cool
was
one, huh?
that's yeah, it's interesting. I knew they did more than just books, but I guess I never really thought of video games as something that they wanted to document the history of. Like, hey, it makes sense. I mean, obviously we have like documentaries and things about it, but I just it never occurred to me.
Yeah. We have a game canon at the Library of Congress. Thank you, Congress. You're not completely useless. You've preserved some of our video games. Good job. Here's a pat on the back.
Lame.
Oh boy. Well, speaking of libraries of Congress and finding information, where might someone find some more information about us, Rob?
Well, Dave, more information about us can be found at www.memorycardlane.com.
Yeah?
Yeah. What can they find over at www.memorycardlane.com, Dave?
Well, every week I like to post our show notes there where you can find links to all the sites that I'd used for my research. And there is a biography of me there, not Rob. If you'd like to know why, go to our website. There is a calendar of upcoming events where you can look at the topics we're going to be talking about in case you'd like to share a story or talk about it or anything like that. On those topics are the gaming questions of the week we're going to be talking about. So if you'd like to submit your answers for the gaming question of the week, or you'd like to actually submit questions that will become our gaming question of the week, there are links where you can share everything on our website as well. Also, you will find various links to communicate with us. There are links to our public Discord if you'd like to converse with us, and there's a link to our Patreon. Our Patreon's really simple. If you like what you're listening to and you want to be able to contribute to our growing community, you can do so for only $2 a month. And lastly, there are links to our social media. I can be found on Twitter at David underscore is underscore wrong, where I wish happy birthdays to video games and talk about the games that I am playing. Rob, what are you doing on social media these days?
I can be found streaming on Twitch playing the occasional first person shooter, kind of whatever I'm feeling at the moment. You can find me at twitch.tv/FATBOIRIPZ.
Well, I think that'll do it for today. I'm going to take a moment and thank you for joining us at my little history lesson. I really enjoy these delves into history. I know it's not the usual dive into a game and how to play a game and what a game is normal. This episode was a little different, but it's fun for me and I really enjoy you joining me. I genuinely do. Rob, what about you?
As always, I want to say thank you to everyone for listening. We're going to keep doing this week after week until we decide we don't want to do it anymore. But it's a lot more fun having that journey be with all of you. So thank you for listening, and you reach out to us. Let us know what you think.
Great. So, guys, we're gonna kind of keep it early history next week, just in a different vein. Next week we're gonna be looking back at the first ever first person racing video game, Nürburgring One. Did I get that right? Nürburgring?
Sure.
Sure, Nürburgring One. As part of the discussion, we'll look at the entire. We're gonna kind of be looking at all of the early video game racing history. Video game racing is a genre that I've spent a lot of time in. Rob, you've, if I'm not mistaken, also a favorite genre of yours, correct?
Yeah, I'd say I'm pretty familiar with the genre.
Yeah. So it's a genre that we both spent a lot of time on. I myself have a lot to talk about with the early stuff. I enjoyed playing a lot of the early racing games, and I mean a lot of the early racing games. I've got some fun stuff for it, and so we're gonna be talking about racing games, obviously. You know, for our gaming question of the week next week, we're gonna also have a discussion on our most memorable online gaming experiences. So if you have anything you'd like to talk about, don't forget to pop on our website and join our Discord and give it. But yeah, racing games, racing genre, fun stuff. So if you'd like to join it or listen to us, you can join us again next week, same time, same place, as we take a high octane, speed filled trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Boom, ba, 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 doo, ah.